Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Kellum. I am the Product Communication Specialist at Leica Camera USA. Welcome to another Tech Talk, where we're going today talk about the Leica M11. I'm with my teammate, John Kreidler. He is a product specialist for Leica Camera USA. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Nathan, I wouldn't miss it for the world. And it's great to see you and great to be here as we talk about the M11. Everyone, it's hard to believe that it's only been a week since we introduced the camera, and a legendary camera used by many legendary photographers to make many legendary images over the course of time. And when we talk about the M11, I'm sure many of us have already devoured the technical specifications or the features of the camera. But today, what we really want to do is we want to look at specifically what we call the heart of the camera. We're going to look at the sensor. We have 5 areas that we're going to discuss, that we're going to show images that Nathan and I have created in our somewhat short time with the camera, as well as some insight from a very special guest. And Nathan, I leave it to you to introduce our guest.
Very happy and honored to have Jesko von Oeynhausen with us. He is the Director of Product for the Division of Photo. Jesko, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure.
And Nathan, thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to take part in the Leica USA Tech Talk for the first time.
So Jesko, you are in charge of product, specifically in photography product at Leica. Can you tell me a little bit more about this role?
Yeah, I'm the director of the product division photo, which means that department is the product management. But I have to say that this is a new role for me. I have been the product manager for the Leica M system for the last 12 years. And yeah, I'm working for Leica since 20 years, so I have made several steps inside the company. But for now, I'm the M specialist from what I've done in the last years. Yes.
Fantastic. And so you've seen many releases throughout the years, specifically of M cameras, like you said. What was special when you started to think about the M11? What kind of things did your team consider?
Yeah, the special thing about starting the development like the M11 was, that's very easy to answer, because we had developed several generations of digital M cameras. I was involved in all of those projects as a project manager and a product manager, and it was always quite easy to find out where to go. We started with the M8, the first digital M, so we had to go digital. Then the second generation, the M9, it was also an easy answer to know where to go, because we needed full frame. That was also very easy to find out. And then going for the M Type 240, we implemented a lot of new technologies that are very convenient for digital photography, like live view and video. Yeah, so again, it was an easy task to find out what customers want and need. With the M10, you know that we made a big step in the dimensions and the ergonomics of the camera. So again, we knew where to go. We want the M that we were used to have from analog times in terms of dimensions. And of course, there are always quality steps that you can take with technology. So starting M11 was not that easy to answer where to go. So we had a lot of hardware concepts that we evaluated which direction is the right one to go. So to find exactly that feature set was a long journey, I would say.
So let's talk a little bit more about that timeline of development. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you plan these things, as far as you come together as a team and you think about different features, different ways for the camera to be operated, and then there's a period of maybe prototypes, testing out those ideas. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that process works?
Yes. So of course, in the beginning, we come up with some technical concepts just on paper, on drawings and designs, and some brief technical specs, how it could look like. And of course, we have a feeling and an idea which one would be the popular one, which one not, and which one is the most expensive one, and so on. So the first step is then that we show these concepts to focus groups, to customers, and to stakeholders, and people that really know about M customers and M photography. And yeah, we collect all the feedback. This we are doing in several countries with a lot of people really focused in a professional focus group. And we collect all this feedback and take this as the basis for a decision, which one we want to follow to the end.
Sounds good. And when you are developing a new product, what kind of challenges or maybe pitfalls should you try to avoid when you are developing such a system that's been around for so long? We're continuing the system. The M11 has the same mount since 1954. I'm sure there's considerations to be, I'm sure there's considerations when it comes to the heritage as well.
Yeah, right. We have, of course, some aspects of the camera that are based on a heritage that we just don't want to change. So I would say the baseline or the thing that we take care of the most is, of course, the rangefinder photography workflow. So we always wanted to stay a true rangefinder camera. So that's the baseline. That's put into stone, we say in German. I don't know how to say it in English.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we try to add all the new possibilities and features around it that also are popular for M type of customers, and to add them in a way that the core of an M is not distracted.
So I think it's time to dive right into it. John, I think we have some images to show and to talk about. I want to invite everyone who's in the chat to ask questions. We will try to answer as many as we can. John, I'll let you take it away.
All right. Hey, thanks, Nathan. So the first point, I guess, on our presentation is resolution. So this is the first time that Leica has produced a camera that will resolve DNG or RAW files in 3 different resolutions, 60, 36, and 18 megapixel, all giving you incredible image quality and a way to be flexible. So depending on what you need in terms of image quality or file size, or down the road, the actual application of how your camera is going to be used, this camera uniquely gives you options to shoot, again, RAW files in 3 different resolutions. So if we look at some of the first images, we have, I believe this is one from our colleagues from Germany, of this fly using the 90 macro with the macro adapter, which is extremely challenging. And I think one of the great benefits of the M11 for me when I was shooting it specifically was how live view seemed, even without the VisioFlex 2, seemed to be a very natural way to shoot. Not taking away anything from the rangefinder experience, but particularly when we're looking at macro, we need to use some live view here at 100%, being able to see the actual hairs on the back of this insect. It's incredible, just the resolution and detail that we're getting from this sensor. So the next image that we talk about is one that I actually took with, as everyone knows, one of my favorite lenses, the 75 Noctilux, and utilizing an M macro adapter here at a Japanese thimbleweed flower, which to me is just kind of an interesting bit of detail where when we go into 100%, we can see how this flower kind of got its nickname where the center looks very much like a thimble. But more than that, more than detail and sharpness, it's true color, and we'll talk about that more in a bit, but it's just the way color translates with this sensor, and how smooth that color gradient is, particularly in, as we'll see, in hard to replicate colors, particularly reds. And we have some great examples of that. So Nathan, I know you had the camera far longer than I did, and you did some extraordinary photography. Show us some of your examples of resolution.
So this is a shot that I took with the 135 APO lens, shot wide open. When I first got this camera, I really wanted to try to push the camera and the lenses as far as I could, and I thought that this would be a good opportunity to do so with the glass chess pieces in the back. And shot wide open, you can see that even at 100%, we're resolving a tremendous amount of detail. One thing that I've noticed with our M lenses is that our M lenses, our modern M lenses, and specifically the APO lenses, really have a tremendous amount of resolution. And this new 60 megapixel sensor can take full advantage of these amazing lenses. And that brings me to a question to Jesko. Jesko, when you are considering this camera, like we talked about how we had the opportunity to pitch lenses since 1954, I'm sure you're doing a lot of testing with these lenses. Can you talk a little bit more about how that testing happens with lenses that were made decades ago, as well as with lenses that are made today?
Yeah, sure. So there are more than one aspect of testing a lens with a sensor. Of course, we do MTF measurements to judge about the resolution. If the lens provides enough resolution for a sensor, of course, this was something that we had to look deeper into to make the decision if we go for 60 megapixels. But as you just mentioned on about your pictures, using an APO 35 millimeter lens clearly shows that this lens provides enough contrast, even in the smallest dimensions and the smallest details. So we were discussing a lot if 60 megapixel makes sense for I would say medium age lenses like the ones that we introduced 10 or 20 years ago. But also here we clearly agreed on that it definitely makes sense to go for 60 megapixels, even with, I would say, normal lenses. We all know that all Leica lenses are on a very high level concerning MTF. But there are also other aspects like the dependency on the angles. So there are certain lenses that are very critical, like the 28 2.8. This provides very, very small angles on the sensor. So this is a big challenge for the image processing to provide a homogeneous, neutral, plain gray image. So this is something that our engineers look really deep into the sensor technology to be very neutral all over the field.
Jesko, we have a question from the chat here. I'm going to put it up on the screen. And that question has to do with the multi-resolution sensor. I'm not sure if you're able to read the question on the screen there, but regarding the ability to change resolution, the first question that I've been seeing in the chat is, do you get improvements in the buffer as far as how many shots you can take if you decide to go to a lower resolution? And could you talk a little bit more as well about the advantages that you get when you go to a lower resolution as well?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic, because the improvement in the performance is quite significant for lower resolution. So the buffer is much faster if you go for medium, so for 36 megapixel DNG5, you already reach endless buffer, even DNG plus JPEG. could be like 80 or 90 pictures that you can fill in the buffer with full burst speed. So it's really significant. And of course, in ST&G, you have this endless buffer. But that's something that's really unique on the technology that we have developed for this multi-resolution sensor. Because I looked, of course, as a product manager, you always try to find things that are better than with the competition. And here I was very happy to find out that other manufacturers' cameras that provide low resolution RAW files, they all have a limitation here. Some of them decrease the bit depth, for example. They just go for 12-bit instead of 14 with lower resolution RAW files. Or another competitor was getting slower with low resolution. So there was no advantage in burst speed. But we found a way to just be faster and do not make any compromises in quality except the resolution, which is the thing you want in that case.
Absolutely. And it's great that our customers are able to choose a lower resolution if they want and keep shooting in that resolution if they want to as well. I had the opportunity to make that selection in the field a couple of weeks ago where I was shooting some landscape shots at 60 megapixels, and then I wanted to do a family portrait. And I knew that I was going to share this family portrait with all of my family. And so I chose the 36 megapixel option, and it was really easy to share that file via text or via email or something like that. So it's really nice that not only do you have the ability to choose that in the field, but you can also choose one resolution for RAW files and a different resolution for JPEGs as well. So it makes it even easier to transfer images.
Absolutely right. I also appreciate just to change that. If I'm doing snapshots, which I do every day with that camera, I just love to go for 18 megapixels because I know it's absolutely sufficient and enough for the things I want to do with my pictures. And I just have a faster camera, and I don't fill up my SSD and my phone. For example, I transfer many images to the phone, and I don't have to worry about file size, filling up my iCloud space, for example, with 60 megapixel RAW files if I do so. And especially if I'm using vintage lenses, what I do a lot. I love using this old screw mount, very small pancake lenses. This is something I also do very often. It just doesn't make sense to use 60 megapixel with such kind of a lens. So just matching the camera to the lens you're using is a great advantage.
Absolutely. John, I think that the next picture was shot by you.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so some water lilies, and again, looking at how not only the resolution, but also the color of the sensor, the transition, even going in, again, with the Noctilux lens, zooming in to 100%, seeing a lot of detail in there. And it's also, for me, a lot of times it's the color. And how the color renders with this camera is really exceptional. So I think the next, there we go, 100%, thank you. And just being able to see the detail on that, the gradient, the transition as the colors change and grade out, for me, it's really interesting and fun to basically pixel peep. I mean, let's be honest, at a lot of these images and how these lenses render. So I know, Nathan, you were in Hawaii recently, and you got to shoot some rocks, because why not, right?
Absolutely. I had the opportunity to go to the Volcanic National Park on the Big Island, and in that park there are these the rocks that we can find there are absolutely spectacular. This again was shot with the 135 APO wide open. First of all, I love the bokeh out of that lens. I think that translates very well on the shot, but most importantly, when you zoom in at 100%, just the amount of detail that can be seen in this image is really outstanding. Like you said, John, it's just a pleasure to be able to discover, the possibilities of these lenses and to discover your images in kind of a new light, just because I wasn't able to see all this detail before, and now I can't. again, just a pleasure to see it on more resolution. A question that we're seeing on the chat here is, Jesko, you mentioned using older lenses. And could you tell us, are all the lenses since 1954, would they all work with the M11? If I bought a lens like the 50mm Summicron, for example, that came with the M3 that you could buy with the M3, is that a possibility as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the compatibility is without any restrictions. There have been some single lenses that go really deep or very close to the sensor. So I don't know exactly which one this is, but yeah, the compatibility should have even improved compared to the previous models, because if you look into the camera to the sensor, you see that there is more space now for the lens. So there could be even a lens that had some collisions with an M9, for example, that could fit in there now. But yeah, I don't know exactly which one this is.
Wonderful. And John, you have an example using a older lens.
Yes, a little
Perfect.
9cm Elmar lens. It's just a lot of fun to shoot thread mount lenses really on any camera, SL based or the new M11. So if we bring up this image, and to be very honest, I was completely blown away when seeing the amount of detail here with this, just a real simple image, some ivy kind of growing in a planter, and then zooming into 100% and really still being able to see and render a lot of detail, a lot of the veining in the leaves and that kind of visual detail that's not expected. And I think Jesko touched on it, that we really strive to do that, right? That we really want just about any lens to be compatible that we've made since, I guess, the 30s, essentially. So I think it's it's just really interesting to see what vintage lenses do and how they resolve. Again, this was 60 megapixel. I didn't test much at 36 or 18. The one thing that I do frequently, though, is to shoot a small JPEG when I'm with friends and family, and then utilizing the Photos app to pass those along. So it's, again, the versatility that we're giving with this camera is beyond anything on the market. So Nathan, I think now we ought to talk a little bit about dynamic range.
Absolutely. This camera is the highest dynamic range M camera that we've built for color cameras. And it really shows at ISO 64. This is a brand new ISO for the M system. Let me show you some examples here. We're going to look at highlight detail first. This is shot in Seattle with the 135 APO lens once again. And we're going to focus on this building right here in the center of the image. And we're going to, I'd like to guide your attention to the highlights more specifically. And if you look close, inside this building, there are white walls. And on these white walls, there is some white paintings. And you can see where the white wall ends and where these paintings begin. Just the amount of resolution and tonal detail can be found specifically in the highlights is something that really, really impressed me. Jesko, can you tell us more about developing the sensor and to meet the needs of photographers of today, but also the photographers of tomorrow when it comes to editing?
Yeah, of course, it's dynamic to reach the highest dynamic range that is possible. This is the most important asset if we are talking about image quality, I would say. The dynamic range we measure or describe as the contrast between the blown highlights and the lowest level of signal that still shows detail and is not covered by noise. yeah, of course, that's a long process to reach the final image quality. And it depends on image processing pipeline, and in the raw file, of course, also on the image processing in the raw conversion software. And yeah, it starts with the development of the sensor, of course, to get the strongest signal out of each pixel. Here is one thing that helps on dynamic range is that dual gain technology that we have in that sensor. This dual gain technology means that we have not only one hardware gain on each pixel, we have two. So the one is for the base ISO of 64, and there's a second gain that we can switch on for a higher ISO, like 200 or 400 in between here. And having this, we can keep up the level of dynamic range even for those medium ISO speeds. If we wouldn't have that dual gain, we would emphasize or gain the noise in the same way as we do gain the signal. So this would mean that we decrease dynamic range with every ISO step. So having dual gain, we can reach a very high dynamic range even at medium ISO speeds.
And this is something that we can see in the next shot, shot by John. I was blown away, John, by the amount of detail that you can get out of the shadows. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, sure. So again, shooting around with a new camera, for me, one thing I always want to see is that dynamic range and what is it? How does it translate? So this would be a 60 megapixel image, shot of some very dark statues along the Penn's Landing area outside of Philadelphia at ISO 64. So as always, the base ISO is always going to give us the best response. So then in Lightroom, doing a little processing with the slider and opening up the shadows to 100, because why not? And then bringing back the highlights to 57. I've got now sky detail. So I'm going to say shadow detail about 4 stops or so, maybe 5 stops, and then the highlights back maybe a stop and a half, 2 stops conservatively. But then there's so much detail within that image. To me, it was very reminiscent of an S camera, medium format. So the Type 7 initially, and then the S3 in terms of all that detail. So Jesko, my question to you, with how phenomenal this sensor is this a sensor that we may see in other products in the near future?
Yeah, of course, this question is very interesting for all of our customers, but of course, I cannot share details about our future products, of course. Even though I know that there have been rumors on the web because based on our keynote that showed some white papers. So you might all be really curious about what's coming here. But please understand that I cannot go into detail there. But what is clear is that we cannot expect any major product update within the next year, because developing an M11 was a huge effort, because we have put so much technology in there. So this was a bit misleading. But to go into detail about the future products, I just cannot really give you a satisfying answer.
Well, it actually is satisfying a little bit, but not completely satisfying. So.
Can you tell us when you started developing the M11, when that was something that Leica really started to work on?
I didn't get that question.
Oh, could you tell us when you started to work on the M11? How long is this process?
Yeah, it's about so the pure development, technical development when engineers start working. That's about 3 years, and starting with the concept phase that I was talking about before. This goes back to 4 years ago. So it's really a long way to reach, and it's really a huge team, and yeah, we had to work really, really hard within in the last two years, especially.
I can see that your hard work is paying off. As we go into the next side of this presentation, we're going to talk about color, which is one of my favorite things about this M11. The color out of this camera is absolutely unbelievable. I have never seen color like this on a full frame sensor. And John, you are a photographer that use medium format very often. Can you tell us your feedback on using this camera and then also using the S camera?
You know, I find the color really reminiscent, and I guess that would be a question for Jesko, in that how are the developments of, say, one product shared with and put into development with other cameras? You know, each of ours systems are so unique between DSLR, mirrorless, and rangefinder, each having its own challenges, let's say. But somehow the color just keeps getting better and better, and it feels like the technology builds on, you know, the previous generation of any camera. Is that how it works, or tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I think these are steps that yeah, just go into each other from different sides. Hard to explain. If you I'm talking about the software development, the color management, the color matrices that we are working on. We approve it as good as we can with the camera generation, and then the next step is to increase or improve the hardware, the color filters on the sensor. So also here we are making big steps, and that was one of the biggest challenges in the M11 development, because we have used here new color filters or hardware filters, the RGB Bayer pattern filters that provide a very broad spectrum. So they show a lot of deep reds and dark blues to the sensor, and for this reason we had to make again big steps in the color management development, and also in the cover glass development that we also want to talk about.
Yeah, I think we can talk about that now, actually. So this is a UV and IR filter that's cemented together, and what's special about it is that it's extremely thin. And can you tell us the advantages of such a thin filter and the new technology that you have with this filter?
Yeah, that's a very complex system, and everything on the camera is related to that cover glass. So we had to find a solution to match all the quality requirements that we wanted to achieve. So the one thing I was talking about is color management to be improved with this wide color spectrum. So to do so, to achieve this, we needed a cover glass that transmits all those colors, this wide spectrum. And this was not too easy to find a technical solution for that. Other manufacturers can use a interference filter to do so, because they have a very sharp edges in the spectrum that they transmit. But this is not a solution for an M camera. That's related to the optical design of especially older M lenses that provide the light in very small angles, and using an interference filter causes reflexes then, and this was the reason why we could not use this normal solution to use an interference filter, but we managed to develop this dual layer filter glass to get a compromise of everything, or to reach all the targets that we wanted to achieve. So if you take another manufacturer's camera, put an M lens on it, you could see serious reflections coming from ultraviolet light and leading to blue reflections from highlights in the picture. That's an effect that you might know from your phone. But the solution that we have found, we are really proud of, and it turns out to work pretty well, resulting in great colors. And yeah, as you said, because it's so thin, also in great contrast and great details. Because if you put in too much glass into the optical design, this decreases MTF performance. So the more glass you have in the optical way, the less MTF, the less details and sharpness you get.
And this is something that I've seen in my experience, especially at ISO 64, just the tonality that can be captured with, in combination with our lenses. And if we look at 100% of this particular shot right here, all the different little variations that you can see from the turtle's nose all the way up the neck, it's just outstanding. It's it's a joy to take the color picker in Photoshop and just to see how many tones are being recorded in this image. I have a question from the chat here from Tony, and the question is related to noise levels at different resolutions. We talked a little bit about pixel binning in our resolution section of the presentation, and with this technology, we have improvements such as some improvements in dynamic range, but also some improvements in noise. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. So the improvement in dynamic range and the improvement in noise is kind of the same. Going into lower resolution means that you achieve a lower noise level in the shadows. And having a lower noise level in the shadows, you just measure a higher dynamic range, because as I said before, the dynamic range is the contrast between the highlights and the first usable noise level. So you're increasing this with lower resolution. That's the basic fact. But to be honest and to be clear, we never want to promise something that we cannot hold. The improvement is there with low resolution, but if you capture 60 megapixels and downsize the file with Lightroom or Capture One to lower resolution, you get a really similar result. So using low resolution DNG gives you a high dynamic range and low noise file straight out of the camera, but it doesn't provide any magic that you could not see if you're shooting 60 megapixels. If you're shooting 60 megapixels, you're capturing and storing everything the sensor sees, and of course, Lightroom can also use this data to get a really good low resolution file.
This is something that I've seen when I'm traveling, where again, the idea of sharing, you can share, and if you're editing on a smaller device or a less powerful device, sometimes editing a 60 megapixel file is a lot for that to ask from that device. And so editing, from the camera a 36 megapixel file seems to be a lot easier, especially if you're editing a bunch of images at once and you want to share those images. So I love the fact that you can make that choice. If you prefer to work with a bigger, more powerful computer when you get back home, or you're working with a smaller device, you can make that choice in the field.
Right.
We have another image here of a flower. This is something that I want to showcase because I've had a lot of challenges in the past capturing this flower accurately, specifically this pink, purple, magenta color on this flower right here. And when we zoom in at 100%, you can see that despite the fact that the actual flower petals themselves are out of focus, I can still see the gradation. I can still see all the colors from the edge of that flower petal to the middle of the flower, which is really outstanding. It's something that I have not seen before on a full frame sensor. And this is also the case with our out of focus areas of the shot. You can see we have bright areas and dark areas in the bokeh on the green right there, and that transition is done beautifully, especially at ISO 64. A question from the chat from Bill Brown regarding profiles for Capture One and Lightroom. There is a embedded Leica profile in the DNG file. And I believe that Capture One has an update for the M11. Is this something that you work with different companies as far as making sure that these files look as good as possible on different software?
Yes, absolutely. We work closely together with Adobe and with Capture One. So Capture One already has a profile for the Leica M11. I think it was available right from the start of last week. And
Last week, yeah.
In Adobe Lightroom, you can use the Adobe standard profile, which is also a Adobe-made profile, especially for the M11, so they had a prototype quite early. And there is the Leica M11 profile. Depends on the settings in Lightroom you have, which one opens first. So the Leica M11 profile is the embedded profile that we have developed. And they differ quite significantly. The Leica M11 profile is more saturated, and I would recommend to try both out, which one matches your taste the best. And as it is highly saturated, the Leica M11 profile, I would recommend to use the Adobe standard profile for high ISO files to get a lower ground noise. And yeah, but you just have to try it out, which one fits best to your needs.
Fantastic. We have another question regarding using different lenses with the M11. I have a slide up here that demonstrates, we talked about, these images with the APO lens. On the slide right here, I have a shot with a 28mm Summicron, which is a spherical lens. And you can see that, the color is absolutely incredible. But if you zoom in, this is shot wide open. You can still see a tremendous amount of detail wide open. I mean, you can see the fact that the cat's eyes are blue and the gradations that we see behind the cat with the light happening behind it. When you are, Jesko, when you're working with these files, I have an example here with the 50 Summicron. Do you have a favorite lens to shoot with when you are testing out this camera?
Yeah, it's a nice coincidence that you asked me this question now, because the answer is that the Summicron 28 is my favorite lens, because it's very compact, and I'm absolutely blown away by the contrast and details that the lens provides. What is not so commonly known is that we have improved the optical design of the Summicron 28 like 5 years ago when we launched the new version, and this lens now even performs even better than the one before. Yeah, and I really love to have this. So I'm a 28mm guy, so that's a fact. And having this lens, you can even, as you see here with this picture, you have a nice bokeh and low depth of field, even though you're shooting wide angle. So it differentiates your pictures from your phone photography very clearly, and but still gives you that versatile possibilities that you have with 28mm lens.
Fantastic. We have another question in the chat here regarding the shutter delay when firing the camera. Is there a difference between shooting with, for example, the M10 or now shooting with the M11? The difference that I'm thinking about is the fact that with the M11, the shutter curtain is always up to reveal, the sensor that's always metering. Can you tell us a bit more about performance when it comes to shooting multiple shots?
Yeah, so as you described, now we are using the sensor for light metering. This is why we keep the shutter always open. So if you take a picture, the shutter needs to be closed before the exposure, but this is going really, really quick. So the shutter lag, if you compare it to an M10 camera, is quite the same. It's like 10 milliseconds slower, but yeah, in practice, you don't feel any difference. That's what we took great care of course.
And if you decide to shoot with the electronic shutter, there is no mechanical item going up or down. So you can go even faster if you're looking to shoot more images.
Absolutely right. Yeah, but the shutter lag with the electronic shutter is not faster. So if I talk about shutter lag, that's the time gap between pressing the shutter and the start of the exposure. This is best if you're using the mechanical shutter.
Sounds good. Next, we are going to talk about color, and specifically corner sharpness. This is an image that I shot when I was testing out the camera. I tried to find a subject that has been challenging in the past, specifically shooting the color red. And this boat has many shades of red. We have on the left-hand side a fresh coat of paint on the top left part of the boat. And on the right-hand side, we have the older paints. And you can see how the light's hitting this boat from light coming from a building. And so we have all sorts of different gradations. First of all, when we look at 100%, we can see that detail very clearly. And one of the things that I love is the ability to see the brush strokes between the fresh coat of paint and the older part of the boat. But when I was looking at this image and inspecting the different colors, what I noticed is that this was a great example as well for corner sharpness. With the new ultra-thin absorption dual layer filter glass, we have amazing corner performance, especially when you're using the high resolution sensor that we have here in the M11. And if we look closely, on the very edge of the sensor, there's a bird which is backlit. And we can clearly see the beak and the legs and the plumage at the far corners of the frame. Jesko, can you tell us a little bit more about corner performance, especially with this new filter?
Yeah, that's exactly, or that's the best example that you could give for that cover glass, because it shows the reds, the red tones that are separated quite clearly. This might be related to the wide spectrum of the color filters that I was talking about. And yeah, having a thin cover glass would blur the bird in the image corner quite significantly if you look into it at 100%, especially with 60 megapixels. So here you would see a very big difference if we would have a normal cover glass, let's say it so.
I love this. It really pushes our photographers, our customers, to crop if they wanted to. We have photographers that use the whole frame and that print very big. We also have photographers that like to crop to reveal certain details in their images. And it's great to know that you're getting performance all the way to the edge of the frame. I mean, just above the bird's head is where that sensor ends. John, do you have some experience with color as far as with the filter?
Well, yeah, well, especially red. Red is incredibly difficult. So anything red to, like you were saying, fuchsia and so on and so forth, it's difficult to replicate, to actually capture the color you see. And that's one thing I would definitely bring out about the M11 is that the camera captures the color that I see. And it's the first time really in a very long time, other than medium format like an S3, that I'm really getting that same color reproduction, particularly over a variety of ISOs. And it's not just at 64, although a lot of our images are at 64 because it's just so exciting to shoot at the Kodachrome ISO. And when we think of color, doesn't everyone think of Kodachrome? I know I do. So yeah, I would tell you that red's extremely difficult, and this camera certainly handles it. Now, this example to me was also extremely impressive, shooting into the sun and barely seeing a flare. And I know all Leica photographers, we just enjoy flare in our lenses. It's just like what we like. So even here where you zoom into 100%, we still see total detail in the frond and the color and the separation. We're not getting any color contamination. It's just really very smooth and clean and sharp and plenty of details, really showing the resolving power of the sensor. How did you see it, Nathan? This is one of your Hawaii shots. I'm a little jealous, by the way.
When I saw that first shot with the boat and I saw the performance that you could get at the corners, I really wanted to test this camera out. And generally speaking, when you are using a wide angle lens, this is when the challenges happen. And I was just pleasantly surprised to know that even with a 28 Summicron, you know, the sun is in the shot. We get a little bit of flare, but a lot less than I would have expected with the sun being right next to these leaves. I can still see a tremendous amount of detail in the shadows. I can see that transition between the shadows and the highlights as we go out of the branch into the far corners of those leaves. Jesko, you and your team did really an incredible job to make this happen.
Yeah, I will forward this to the team because I'm not engineering. Yeah, but one nice side note on flare, ghost and flare effects. That's also not so commonly known yet. But the M11 is much better here compared to all the predecessor models. Again, because we don't have this light metering measuring cell inside the room of the sensor. So there's just more space. So there's not so much where light can reflect. So there might be certain pictures that would have shown strong reflexes and ghost effects with an M10 that now are crisp and clear, like the example that you just showed here.
Absolutely. And actually, on the topic of metering, we have a question here. Jesko, could you tell us a little bit more about the different metering options that we have on the M11, both in rangefinder mode and in live view mode?
Yeah, the new thing about it is that all the metering modes are now available also for rangefinder photography. So in all previous M models back to the M5, where we introduced in-body light metering, it was always based on a very simple technology. So the light metering worked in the way that there was one measuring cell, one light meter measuring the light reflected from the closed sensor. And of course, today it's common that you have intelligent light metering, multi-field light metering, but for that you need the full sensor signal to make analysis over the full picture. So now with the technology using an open shutter, we can also provide this for rangefinder photography. So as a user, you just get a better output, you get better results, better exposures, just a better yield in your photography, even in rangefinder mode. So this is one of the major improvements for me personally, I would say, to just be better in snapshots.
Yes, and the ability to utilize these metering modes in rangefinder mode, which allows us even more battery time. We really haven't talked about battery yet on this camera. The battery is phenomenal on this camera. The longest battery I've ever seen on an M camera by far. And having the ability to just always shoot in rangefinder mode, despite the fact that you're working maybe in contrasty situations or dynamic situations, allows our users to really have another tool in their arsenal to get these shots. I love it. We have a question regarding the 3 resolutions here. I'll put it on the screen. And the question is related to color. And does color change when you go to a lower resolution? I know that each resolution is shooting in 14-bit. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, but the answer is quite short, I would say, because there's no difference in the color reproduction depending on the resolution.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Yeah.
John, the next picture was shot by you, I believe. Was this shot with the Nautilus, with the boat?
No, Summilux 35.
The Summilux, indeed, yes.
Yeah. So, down at Penn's Landing, right in Philadelphia, I just came upon this somewhat strange end of yoga class with the freighter coming up the river. And, I just found, I took the shot because I found it amusing in some way, just kind of from a visual story standpoint. And then when I later went home and I was processing out the image and checking how things looked in the corners, when we zoom into 100% to the corner I couldn't believe the sharpness and detail, particularly from the Summilux. So that was 2009, I believe it came out. But you can read like the water level marks on the ship. You can see the crew and one of the crew member, and what the crew members are wearing and the color, and also read the detail across the river of the buildings and that kind of thing. I mean, to me, and chances are I was zone focusing. It just, to me, it was surprising how good it is in a way, but I was glad to see it. So again, just almost speechless apparently on how good the edge sharpness is on this camera. It is phenomenal. It has to be experienced. So make sure you get your orders in today.
And the fact that you can utilize 60 megapixels, I mean, you're shooting pretty far away from that boat. And
Right,
when you zoom in, you can see that there are people on that boat and you can see what color their helmets are. I mean, that was really, for me, the element that surprised me the most. Just every little detail that is there, you will see it with our lenses and this high resolution sensor.
Definitely.
I think that's a good transition to ISO performance. John, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, sure. So ISO range, the native is 64 ISO, and we have incredible low light performance because of this sensor, the triple resolution 60 megapixel backside illuminated sensor. So we can take a look at some images done in a variety of different ISOs. So this being 400 at Longwood Gardens outside of Philadelphia, in the fountains, and at sunset, seeing again very little flare as the sun shone brightly at sunset, but zooming into 100% and looking at not only the sharpness and the detail, but the color of the sunlight and how it's coloring the fountain, the water from the fountain, and it's very realistic. And a lot of times, again, reds, oranges are very difficult. They look false, they look fake. But again, this is color as I remember seeing it, and to me, it's just extraordinary the way this camera not only captures the detail, the resolution, but the color. And not really at base ISO, it's at 400, which isn't crazy. I think the next example we have is Nathan's, and he's kind of pushing things a bit. Tell us about this image, Nathan.
Yeah, so one of the things I noticed with this camera, and thanks to the backside illuminated sensor, the dual gain sensor that you talked about, Jesko, is how good the colors are even at high ISOs. So one of the things that I tend to do when I'm shooting at night in the city is that when I am in a situation where I need to bring that ISO up to get a good fast shutter speed, I tend to, and this is in order to kind of test the camera, instead of going to a higher ISO, I tend to go to a high ISO and then underexpose the image by a couple stops to see how much detail I can retrieve from the shadows, for example, here at ISO 6400. So again, this is underexposed by 3 stops. I could have gone to maybe ISO 10,000 or 12,500, but I decided to keep it at ISO 6400 and manually underexpose it. And the amount of data in these files really impressed me, especially the accuracy of these colors. Let's zoom in at 100%. Just fantastic colors at ISO 6400 and great tonality too. This is something that surprised me when I started to bump up the shadows in Lightroom, is that we have 2 gentlemen in front of us here on the street here, and one of them has a dark jacket, and there's very little noise in that dark jacket. Usually that's when the noise starts to appear. And on the gentleman's right-hand side is another gentleman with a checkered jacket. And that's the kind of detail that I wasn't expected to see at ISO 6400, underexposed, and then bringing all this back in the shadows, seeing these very fine details in the shadows after post-processing really proved to me that this is something completely different compared to what we've released in the past. Jesko, can you tell us a little bit more about your experience with high ISOs and just the amount of data in these files?
Yeah, it's funny that you picked out this part because that's exactly what we saw here when we were discussing high ISO performance. Of course, we are also testing and discussing deeply how good we are and if the product is good enough for the market. So we especially in the last months, we made a lot of benchmarks and comparisons between cameras and competition cameras. And what we found out is that there is a clear and strong advantage in the color rendition in high ISO in the finest details. This is where you find the differences to other cameras. So if you're only looking into the ground noise level, you might find that it's good and very good, but comparable to other cameras that are new. But if you look into the color rendition and the total how the small details in your picture look like, and if they still show the color that they have in nature, there you will see a really strong result if you look at the M11 pictures. Exactly. It sounds like we talked before about your results or what we want to talk about here, but we just didn't, and it's really funny that you just mentioning the same things that I was thinking about.
And we have a question from the chat. Is any noise reduction work done on this image? There is. I try to reduce the amount of noise that I can without sacrificing detail. Now, what I've seen with these files, and it gets better and better as you go to lower ISOs, of course, is just how much you can apply to this image when it comes to bringing the highlights up, bringing the shadows up, and changing elements in the raw file, such as the noise reduction. This is one of the cameras where I feel that I am able to go much higher in the noise reduction slider than before in a camera and still retain a tremendous amount of detail and grain structure throughout the image. I think this is a testament to just how much data is being captured with this new sensor. John, this is, I believe, your image. I love the colors in the shot.
Yeah, so this is ISO 12.5. And again, the sky, at the end of the day, blue hour, Philadelphia Art Museum, and just the amount of detail that's captured and how little noise there is at 12.5, to me was outstanding in terms of performance. I'm always of the thought to really just shoot whenever possible the ISO that's going to give me the best exposure, figuring that's going to give me the least amount of noise. And I believe that's still the case, but seeing Nathan's example of being 3 stops under and then being able to bring out detail and it not being noisy is starting to give me reason to think about maybe not pushing it quite as far. And being able to underexpose by a stop or two and still recover the image and process it out. So again, it's another tool. This camera is giving you the flexibility to shoot at whatever ISO you'd like in any way that you'd like to shoot. So again, it's just incredible. Here with this Singapore grave flower, again at 10,000 ISO with the 75 Noctilux with the macro adapter. Again, I wanted to raise the ISO so I actually could handhold the image and take it. But even zooming into 100%, seeing the color gradient again, how little noise there is in the image, and just how the gradient for the color, the transitions, and just kind of how natural the color looks. And again, it's the color as I did see it. So to me, it's just a great experience shooting this camera that really takes, rangefinder, you're shooting the world unfiltered, and you're capturing things now with this camera the way you see them, not just resolution, but also color. So it's really an advancement of a rangefinder. So
John,
Nathan, I think you've got the next image. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question from the chat here regarding using rangefinder lenses. We've introduced a 60 megapixel sensor, and I think there are customers that are intrigued about using the rangefinder and being accurate with these longer lenses or lenses with a shallow depth of field. John and Jesko, could you please tell me your thoughts on this?
Yeah, let me start, because that's also something that we had very long and deep discussions about it in the phase where we were deciding about the product concept, because we were also questioning ourselves: is the rangefinder precise enough to focus on 60 megapixels? If you would have asked us 10 years ago, if we ever would achieve or dare to make a rangefinder camera for 60 megapixel, we would have definitely said no, never. We cannot do this. But it really turned out to be just working. The rangefinder is extremely precise, especially since the M10, where we have reworked the rangefinder from ground on for the M10 because we knew that it has to be future-proof, and we achieved a very high level of precision here. And I would hand over to John to say his opinion about it if it proves to be working in real life, because what I have heard is that it somehow just matches.
No, it does. It definitely does. And I've noticed that more so with the M10R in particular at 40 megapixel, just that need to obviously, because of the increase in resolution, to make sure you're definitely, in focus and not just out, unless you want to be just out. So to me, shooting the M11, I enjoy the rangefinder experience, and that's really why I want to shoot an M, is to have that experience, seeing the world unfiltered, seeing beyond the frame lines, and that sort of things, being, slowing down, seeing light in a different way are all great things. But with the M11, live view for me no longer feels like cheating. It just feels like another way to shoot the camera. And I'm anxious to get my hands on a VisiFlex 2 and really study that and see how that goes. But even using the screen, that's a 900 nit screen, I found in a lot of situations allowed me to focus, particularly with a macro adapter, which a rangefinder is not going to work. So I enjoy both ways of shooting, and it's definitely, I can get like a 75 Noctilux wide open. I can get it in perfectly sharp focus using the rangefinder. Now, the one thing I will tell everybody is it takes practice. And if I'm shooting another camera for a couple of weeks and then I go grab my M camera with my 75 Noctilux, it's going to take me an hour maybe to get acclimated back to it. But that's part of the fun, being able to shoot cameras that you enjoy shooting in a specific way, I think is something that really speaks to Leica photographers. So that's definitely part of what I enjoy.
While you mentioned focusing about using live view, don't forget to mention that this has improved with the M11 significantly, because we have this live view stabilization, which really helps if you make macro pictures, 100% zoom, you want to have the focus really precise. You can do it much better with a stabilized live view.
And Jesko, the rangefinder itself, is it different than the M10 variations? Is the M11 the same rangefinder as in the M10?
Yes, that's the same.
Fantastic. So folks, we're going to talk about our last topic here, which is the new ability to do long exposures on this camera up to 1 hour, which is twice the length on the SL2 systems, which kind of blew my mind when I saw the specs for the first time. And the ability to access an electronic shutter up to 1/16,000th of a second. So let's talk a little bit more about how we can utilize this. This is shot with Jesko, the lens that you like, the 28mm Summicron, and just the amount of light that can be captured with this backside illuminated sensor, but also the ability for the camera to, when the camera is able to do 1 hour long exposures, I tend to not do 1 hour long exposures. I haven't tried that yet, but I've seen just incredible performance for those shorter times. I tend to do more 15 seconds to 2 minutes. And because we have so much room to play with when it comes to how long the camera can take long exposures, I've just seen amazing performance at the settings that you see here. Jesko, what is your experience with long exposures, and why did we decide to go and push it to 1 hour this time?
The decision to push it is just based on the improved sensor performance. It's always or was always limited by side effects that come from heating, for example, that we have to somehow limit the long exposure. And yeah, we figured out that with this sensor and camera architecture, we might even enable 60 minutes. But yeah, I think in practice, it will not be used too often because it's really a long time. But the good news about it is that you now can disable the long exposure noise reduction, because then you would need to wait 2 hours.
And this brings me to another topic, which is the battery life. And because we can do such long exposures, and because we have access to the USB-C port, the battery life is absolutely incredible on this camera. John, what is your experience with battery life when you're shooting with this camera?
It's crazy, bonkers. Like I can't really explain. Other than like shooting. So when I had the camera, I created about 1,000 images over the course of 3 or 4 days. And the interesting part of all that was, at the end of that time, my camera battery was still at like 60%. So I know rangefinder mode, I think we're rated somewhere around 1900 raw files. So it's amazing to have a battery last that long, where M10R and previous, maybe a couple hundred, 300 raw files on a battery charge. So, and then the 240 maybe was 500 or 600. So it's even more than what the Type 240 battery was delivering. So it's really, again, another facet of this camera that is very interesting, and it's, a real positive feature that, if I went out with my M10 monochrome, I usually have at least 2, if not 3 batteries with me, for a day of shooting, where now I don't have to carry the extra batteries. I've got a battery that's, chances are, is going to last me all day. And if I run into a problem, I can always charge it on the fly using the USB-C connection and a power bank that I have, in my backpack that I'd use for my phone when my phone goes dead to charge its battery. So again, just the level of detail and customer feedback, I think, was a big part of a lot of these, what I would call convenience features. Really make a big difference in putting the M really to that next level. I mean, have you had a similar experience shooting with it?
Yes, when I was testing this camera out, I really wanted to test out the battery, and I was shooting from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and I had an hour lunch, so we're looking at 5.5 hours to 6 hours of shooting. I had different lenses, shot at different ISOs, used live view, really tried to put the camera through its paces. And when I returned home, exhausted after walking around New York all day, I thought for sure that the battery would be, around maybe 20%, maybe 10%. I still had 45% battery left. So the fact that I could go out for dinner and shoot some more around the city after dinner was a really nice surprise. Jesko, so we have a bigger battery in the M11. What other improvements have you considered to extend the battery life on this M11 system?
Well, it's also a complex matrix of power-saving measures. But the secret, or no, it's not a secret, but the most effective measure that we have taken is the exposure measurement. That we did this in a very power-saving way, to not just run the sensor in live view without showing it to get all the information for the light metering. We read it out in a very power-saving way. So that makes a difference to a standard compact system camera that just uses or has to use live view for all the time, and that's why we achieve here a significant higher amount of pictures that you can take with one battery load. It's
fantastic.
Again, the rangefinder that helps us here a lot.
Definitely.
Indeed, absolutely. Jesko, we only have time for one last question. And that question is a personal one, which is, what is your favorite feature on this new M11 camera?
Of course, there are a lot of favorite features when you worked on it all the time. But yeah, also for me in the past months, working with that camera every day, not as you did. I didn't have the time to take nice pictures, but I work with the camera, of course, every day. And so having this great battery life and having the possibility to charge it every occasion, like I pulled out the USB-C cable from my MacBook and plugged it into the camera, and I just used that one cable the whole day to charge everything. So I never had an empty battery. This was very convenient for me. But of course, to talk about it as a camera, it's the color rendition and the total Leica look on the image, on the images that you get, that you see in every picture. That's the thing that I appreciate most on that camera.
Well, Jesko, thank you so much for joining us. Please say, thank you and congratulations to your team. What an exciting release for our customers. John, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, we will be doing more Tech Talks in the future. We hope that you can join us for more questions and more time with the M11 camera. You can see the M11 camera at various Leica stores around the United States and around the world, as well as your favorite dealer. Again, Jesko, thank you so much. Folks, we will see you next time.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Great to be with you guys. Take care, everybody.